Good evening and welcome to the 15th Annual Connie Spear Birbaum Memorial Lecture. My name is Rabbi Daniel Berman. I serve as the rabbi here at Temple Rain, and I'm so pleased to welcome you for this very special and very important event tonight. Thank you to the talented musicians and the Zamir Chorale Ensemble for a beautiful musical opening to this evening's program. I would like to extend a special welcome to Consul General of Israel to New England, Rabbi Yaakov, and Deputy Consul General of Israel to New England, Matan Zamir. I would also like to recognize elected officials who have joined us tonight. State Representatives Paul Broder, Stephen Howitt, Louis Kafka, Kay Khan, and Secretary of Transportation Stephanie Pollack. Thank you for being with us here tonight. And most importantly, I want to offer my deep gratitude to Dr. Herbert Birbaum and his family for initiating this lecture 15 years ago in memory of your beloved Connie. While I didn't know Connie, I do know how deeply her memory guides your family. Her passion and her generosity of spirit and commitments to the Jewish and the broader community inspire all of us all the time. May her memory always be a source of strength and blessing for you. It is now my pleasure to welcome Joni Falk, Connie's best friend, who will share her reflections on the remarkable woman whose memory brings us together for this extraordinary lecture each year.
Good evening. I was deeply moved and honored when Herbie asked if I would speak about Connie tonight. Connie and I were great friends. We shared a lot, laughed a lot, spoke about our children, our challenges, and just about everything. Now, 15 years later, as I think about what to share with you, I am drawn to speak more about the incredible legacy that she left behind than the intimate details of the friendship that we so enjoyed. We all ask ourselves, what is the meaning of a life? What will each of us leave behind that will influence and impact others long after we are gone? The wealthy have an opportunity to change the world through philanthropy. The famous author will be read for decades, and the medical researcher through cures that will later alter the lives of people in future generations. But Connie was not extraordinarily wealthy, or a well-known author, or a medical researcher, and yet she left a grand legacy that has had an impact on her family, her community, and on each of us sitting here tonight. How did that happen? Connie was a doer. She was a connector. She was an extreme optimist. She had an abiding love for Judaism and for her very broad community, which she embraced. She brought together people with diverse and very divergent opinions about everything, including but not limited to politics and religious affiliation. To Connie, people's opinions and religious practices were just their outer garb. She was able to see inside their outer personas to bring out the warmth, the soul, and the best that they had to offer. Her extraordinary social intelligence, warmth, and generosity made her uniquely qualified to coordinate unity missions, dialogue groups, and interdenominational learning events for the Synagogue Council of Massachusetts. These events brought people together whose paths would never have crossed and provided them with connectivity, common experience, and shared purpose. And this is precisely what we are doing here this evening. and what the Connie Spear Birbaum Memorial Lectures have enabled for the last 15 years. Through this annual event, Connie's legacy lives on, bringing Achdut, unity, tolerance, and diversity of opinion together to enable all of us to be exposed to great speakers in the Jewish world and to learn with and from each other. Connie died at the very young age of 48, and her life was not always easy. She faced adversity with courage, humor, and grace. Even at the end of her days, when it was apparent that she would not win her fight with cancer, she expressed, "I have not been lucky, but I have been greatly blessed." Each year at the Seder, I think of Connie's comment when we sing Dayenu. Someone at our table will inevitably ask, how can one say that if God brought the Jewish people to Mount Sinai but did not give them the Torah, that it would have been sufficient? Connie's reflection on her life is the answer to this question. She was keenly aware of all the blessings that life bestowed and never took anything for granted. She felt so blessed by her amazing husband, Herbie, and by her 3 beautiful children. She also cherished her friendships, her shul community, and the broader community. Her glass was always overflowing. And this quality of hers was transmitted to each of her children, and they keep it alive long after her passing. They know how to meet adversity with courage. Ilana is an incredible mom to her 3 beautiful children, Sophia, Michaela, and Jack. She, like Connie, is invested in strengthening the Jewish community through her work with the OU, and also by connecting and bringing new young families to her shul in Englewood. Ariel has carried Connie's compassion in her work as a nurse, bringing new life into the world, giving new mothers confidence to care for and nurse their newborns, as she cares for her own beautiful new baby, Lizzie. And Benji, like Connie, is going to change the world. Beyond a vision of bringing all Jews together, he is working to bring leaders and innovators in Israel and in Arab countries together. All of this is part of Connie's living legacy. Herbie, of course, a most fabulous father, has had a lot to do with it as well. Connie knew how to be an amazing friend, and I learned so much from her. And so it is not a surprise to me that Connie's daughter Ariel and my own daughter are also best friends. Throughout 4 years of college and beyond, they shared a room, giving up the habit only to get married and start families of their own. Even the gift of friendship seems to have been transmitted to the next generation. Connie modeled friendship, love, activism, connection to the Jewish people, and she passed it on to her children, to her community, and to each of us sitting here tonight. Her life was way too short, but it was such a blessing for us all. Thank you.
I rejoiced when they said to me, "We are going to the house of our Lord." Our feet stood inside your gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem built up a city knit together. Pray for the well-being of Jerusalem. May those who love you be at peace. May there be well-being within your ramparts, peace in your citadels. For the sake of my kin and friends, I pray for your well-being. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I seek your good.
Oh everyone. I'm Neil Wallach, and I have the honor of being the chair of Combined Jewish Philanthropies. And at CJP, we've had the pleasure of partnering with JCRC in many efforts. And we've mostly worked to engage our community in thoughtful and respectful discussions with people with diverse points of view. And we've been able to voice our concerns and hear those of others, always with respect, and always while expressing support for a secure, democratic Jewish state of Israel. So with that in mind, it's really a pleasure to be able to introduce our keynote speaker tonight and Israel's highest diplomat to the United States of America, Ambassador Ron Dermer. Born and raised on our side of the Atlantic in Miami Beach, Florida, it's a division rival, I think, in the NFL. The ambassador holds a degree from the Wharton Business School at the University of Pennsylvania, as well as from Oxford University. And then he traveled to Israel. He served as Israel's Minister of Economic Affairs to the United States and as senior advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu. He's also a former columnist for the Jerusalem Post, and Ambassador Dermer's co-authored with Natan Sharansky the best-selling book, The Case for Democracy, The Power of Freedom to Overcome Tyranny and Terror. And the book has been translated into 10 languages thus far. I know I'm personally looking forward to hearing your remarks, Ambassador, on the challenges facing Israel today, and I'm sure we all are. After the session, after the discussion by Ambassador Dermer, there'll be a Q&A session that will be moderated by JCRC's Director of Israel Engagement, Eli Cohen-Skell. And with that, it's my pleasure to ask you to join me in welcoming Ambassador Dermer to the podium.
Rubbing my nose into a division rival, very diplomatic. The Jews waited 40 years to go to the Promised Land. Dolphin fans are 44 and counting. But I have to tell you, when the Dolphins are eliminated from the playoffs, which usually happens quite early in our season, I go all in for the Patriots because of Robert Kraft. Great friend of the Jewish people and the Jewish state, and is being recognized as one of our honorees this year. Those of you who follow me on Twitter or Facebook, one of the 70 Americans who we're honoring for making a uniquely valuable contribution to strengthening Israel and our alliance with the United States. So you are very blessed to have him in this community. The first thing I ask, since I'm from Miami Beach, is can you hear me in the back of the room? Hands? Back of the room? Fine? Great. Okay. I want to thank Rabbi Berman for opening his synagogue. And I just want to thank all of you for coming. It's a testament of your commitment to Israel that you're here and not watching the Celtics game. So I want to thank you for that. I had a short day today, but I was able to meet your remarkable governor, Governor Baker, and to thank him for his friendship towards Israel, and also to visit Mass Challenge, where Claire Scheimer, where's Claire, who we were lucky to have work for us in the ambassador's office at the embassy. They're really doing remarkable things, and I just want to thank anyone here who's part of that, and if you're not part of it, you should be, because it's, I think, doing great things for Massachusetts and doing great things for Israeli technology as well. I want to thank the state legislators who are here and the work that you do week after week, month after month to strengthen Israel at the state level. It's very important, and it comes up from the bottom, and it's deeply appreciated. I want to also recognize Consul General Yehuda Yaakov, and I want you all to thank me, to join me in thanking him, I should say. Thank me for having such a good Consul General, that's true. But join me in thanking him for the wonderful job he's done representing New England for over 40 years. I want to thank Adam Sutton and Neil Wallen for your leadership in this community. It's not taken for granted. And most of all, I want to thank Herbert Birbaum for inviting me to speak at this annual lecture and the remarkable introduction and remarks that were made about her. She was obviously a very special woman. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be part of this lecture series. And I know this is a lecture series that was designed to bring people together. And we're at, I think, a very historic time where people should be brought together. And thank you for giving me that honor to be here tonight. Now, in the next few days, a major decision will be made. Actually, tomorrow, a major decision will be made. And next week, a historic decision will be carried out. And I want to speak about both of those. The first major decision, those of you who don't have a Twitter feed may not know this, but the President has announced that tomorrow he's going to make his decision about the Iranian nuclear deal. And I know this has been a very controversial issue in this community and many communities around the country. And I know that there are people who love Israel who are on both sides of the debate. They were then, they are now. And some of the people I deeply admire disagree with me on this issue and disagree with the government of Israel, and that's all right. But I want to explain to you all tonight, before that decision tomorrow, why Israel is so grateful for what looks to be a dramatic change in policy regarding the nuclear deal with Iran. You may recall that Israel opposed the nuclear deal with Iran. If you missed that, then you're not been paying attention. And my Prime Minister came to speak to Congress 3 years ago to state his opposition to the deal, which is, for me, as ambassador, was frankly the highlight of my tenure because it fulfilled a fundamental moral obligation for the Jewish state to speak out, particularly on matters of life. I want you to understand why Israel opposed it. There is no nation in the world more threatened by Iran than Israel. None. There are other nations threatened as well. But Iran openly calls and actively works towards the destruction of Israel. And living memory of the Holocaust, it calls, Iran's leaders openly call for the destruction of Israel. Now, if there was a deal that was made that would prevent this fanatical regime from ever developing nuclear weapons, I would have gone synagogue to synagogue and house to house throughout this country to convince people to support it. But that's not what this deal does. It doesn't do that at all. It does not block Iran's path to a bomb. It paves Iran's path to an entire nuclear arsenal. Because what this deal does is it puts temporary restrictions on Iran's nuclear program. And those restrictions will be automatically removed in a few years. Now, I know a decade may seem like a long time in the life of politics, but it's a blink of an eye in the life of a nation. And we have to think about what's going to happen when all of those restrictions that everyone touts today, when all of those are automatically removed. Not if Iran stops being the foremost sponsor of terror in the world, not if Iran stops marching through the region and conquering countries, not if Iran stops calling for the annihilation of Israel. They are automatically removed. All that has to happen is the calendar has to change. At that point, Iran will be able to enrich the uranium on an industrial scale, legally, legitimately, hundreds of thousands of centrifuges. Meanwhile, while this deal is going on, Iran is not frozen its nuclear program. They're advancing. They're doing research and development on the most advanced centrifuges, which is how you spin uranium much faster. They're developing their ballistic missiles. They're doing that in defiance of UN Security Council resolutions, but they don't care. This is a deal that in 10 years or so, Iran will not have to sneak in or break in to the nuclear club. They will simply walk in to the nuclear club. And that's why for Israel, this deal basically puts us on cruise control heading over a cliff. And when people tell you the deal is working, they are saying the cruise control is working. They are not talking about the cliff. That was always Israel's main concern with the deal, and it was the concern expressed by the Prime Minister 3 years ago. I hate to give homework assignments and speeches that I gave, but tonight, go back and reread the speech that he gave 3 years ago to Congress. He said, the greater danger of this deal is not that Iran will violate it and get to a bomb. It's that Iran will get to many bombs simply by keeping the deal. That's why it was so bad. And of course, there was a price to the deal. And the price was all the sanctions relief. Not just giving Iran the clear path to the bomb tomorrow by getting temporary restrictions today, but also all the sanctions relief. Iran was facing a headwind of sanctions, and we were working for years and years and years to put those sanctions on. And you had crippling sanctions on Iran only for about 18 months. Those were sanctions preventing Iran from selling oil, and sanctions on Iran's financial system. Made it very hard for Iran to move money. And it was putting a massive squeeze on Iran. All those sanctions were removed. Today, Iran sells about 1.5 million barrels a day more of oil than they did when those sanctions were in place. 1.5 million barrels a day. The price of oil, check in the morning papers, around $70. That means that Iran is getting over $100 million a day. $3 billion a month. Over $35 billion a year. Today, as more investment pours into Iran, that number will grow. And they can get not $35 billion a year, maybe $70 billion, maybe $100 billion a year. So for the next 10 or 15 years of this deal, Iran will get over $1 trillion because they can sell oil. That's the big money. The small money was all that money that was frozen in bank accounts that they got when the deal was signed. That's the small money. The big money is leaving this deal in place, allowing Iran to sell all the oil that it can, and all that money flowing into Iran's coffers. Now, I'd love to tell you that Iran's going to take that money and it's going to use it to establish a GI Bill for returning members of the Revolutionary Guard. But that's not happening, and it's not going to happen. Iran is using that money to fuel its war machine in the Middle East, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, which Iran controls through its terror proxy Hezbollah, in Yemen, where Iran is trying to do to the Saudis what it did to us in Lebanon. It's trying to establish a base, a terror base, to fire rockets and missiles into Saudi Arabia, just like it did through Hezbollah in Lebanon against us. It's trying to do that to the Saudis through the Houthis in Yemen. So we've gone from a situation where Iran was facing enormous sanctions pressures. Yes, they were advancing their program, but they weren't breaking out to a bomb, and we didn't think they were going to break out to a bomb. They were facing finally a headwinds of sanctions, and they had to choose because there was such an economic squeeze on them. And now all those sanctions have been removed, and the Iranian tiger has been unleashed throughout the region. And this has vastly increased the prospects for war. You remember 3 years ago when people said, it's this deal or war? Well, this deal has increased the likelihood of war. And you see that every day. And if you don't see it, you're not paying attention to what's happening in Israel. Where any day, Iran can strike at Israel. So it's a very dangerous situation. And that's the background for what Prime Minister Netanyahu showed last week, last Monday, a week ago today, in what is perhaps the greatest or one of the greatest intelligence operations operation since World War II. And how about a round of applause for themselves? What you saw were Iran's plans to make a bomb stored in those safes. They didn't burn the files. They didn't destroy the files. They stored it. And somebody, Rabbi, you'll appreciate this, somebody said, when you store the chametz over Pesach, you plan on eating it after Pesach. Or else you burn it. They're not storing plans for nuclear weapons for some museum 100 years from now. They're storing plans for nuclear weapons because when those restrictions are removed in a few years, Iran's leaders will go into that safe and they will use it to build a nuclear arsenal to be used against Israel. Anyone who said that Netanyahu presented nothing new does not know what they are talking about. It was 100,000 documents, photos, files, and the Prime Minister did not even show the most damning evidence because he can't, because it would lead to greater proliferation. There's much more damning evidence. There's only one intelligence agency in the world who's seen it, which is the United States. And in the last couple of days, we've had the British, the French, the Germans, looking and beginning to look at this information. It takes weeks to go through it. You got to speak Farsi. How many of you here speak Farsi? Hands? Oh, we have a few more in Israel. You have to have understand technical knowledge that has to do with making nuclear weapons. So it's not easy to do. And today, a group from Israel went to Vienna to start presenting the evidence to the International Atomic Energy Agency. Anyone who says that this is not new either doesn't know what they're talking about or has an agenda, or both. This is very new. It's also very damning, because it shows that Iran falsified all the reports that they made to the IAEA. And in their effort to conceal their program, they are violating the most fundamental tenet that they will never seek to acquire nuclear weapons. Well, why are you keeping all that information in the vaults? What's the reason for it? So, when I have seen some of the responses over the last week, I can recall the words of Jeremiah. They have eyes that do not see, and ears that do not hear. When we don't want to know something, we just refuse to accept the facts in front of us. People continue to say the Iran deal is working. It's working for Iran. It's working very well for Iran. It's enabling them to become a great regional power, and it's provided a path, a clear path, and a legitimate path that they will use to build a nuclear arsenal in a few years. That is the fact. And so obviously Israel hopes that tomorrow we will see an announcement that will represent a shift in policy. And we are confident that the President will make the right decision for America, for Israel, and for the world. Now, it's not going to solve all the problems that Israel faces with Iran, but it's going to take us off cruise control. That's what it's going to do. It's going to allow us to turn that wheel and not go off that cliff. And we'll have many challenges, and we'll have to deal with them. But at least we're not going to be on cruise control, automatic pilot, heading off a cliff. And I know that many of the decisions the President makes they're deeply controversial. They're probably not supported by virtually anyone in this room, a lot of his agenda. But I hope on this decision, you'll understand the stakes that are involved, and to the greatest extent possible, try to support the effort to pursue a different path. And the more people support the effort, the more likely we are to see the U.S. and its European allies work together on a different course. And we support that. But we are very much looking forward to tomorrow and the decision that's going to be made. It's something I've devoted a huge share of my time as ambassador to take us off cruise control, heading off that cliff. In addition to that fateful decision, tomorrow, in 1 week's time, a historic decision will be made. The United States will move its embassy to Jerusalem. Now, I believe this was one of the fourth great decision in the history of Zionism. The recognition and now the decision to move its embassy is the fourth. I'll make them one decision. The first was the Balfour Declaration, calling for the reestablishment of a Jewish national home in our ancient homeland. The second was the UN resolution in 1947, where for that brief moment, the UN had a little bit of moral clarity. And it was very brief. The Soviets regretted it later. They wanted to kick the British out of the Middle East. But at that moment, that formula, 2 states for 2 peoples, that everyone talks about today as if it's some new thing, was there. And the international community recognized the right of the Jewish people to a state. Second decision. Third was President Truman's decision, 70 years ago next week, to recognize the newly established state of Israel. By the way, against his most senior advisor. And the fourth decision was President Trump's decision on December 6th to recognize Jerusalem as our capital. And now, to move the embassy 70 years to the day from the day that Israel was declared a state. Now, we are a very contentious society within Israel, you may know. If any of you think that it's too much partisanship here, too much polarization, come to Israel, spend some time in our Knesset. I think if you think 2 parties are hard, try 12. But on this issue, there is unity throughout Israel. Government, opposition, all across the political spectrum, because we believe that Israel should not be singled out unfairly anymore. We are the only country in the world whose capital is not recognized by the nations of the world. And this is a decision that we are very thankful that the 13th president who was around since Israel was established, it took 13, I guess it's lucky 13 for the Jews, but it took 13 presidents to have somebody who was actually willing to make this decision. And as Jews, again, regardless of what you feel on many other domestic issues and other things, I hope we can take a moment to appreciate the historic nature of that decision. You know, we, the Jewish people, represent, we remember King Cyrus from 2,500 years ago. I don't know if the Persians remember Cyrus, but the Jewish people remember that decision because of the weight that Jerusalem plays in our national consciousness. No city has been more important to any people than the city of Jerusalem is to the Jewish people. And we proved it by not being there. By not being there in sovereign terms for a couple thousand years. And we still pray towards it 3 times a day. And when we break that glass underneath the chuppah, we remember the temple. And when we circumcise our sons, or when we go to a house of mourning, every step in the Jewish cycle of life, we remember Jerusalem. So this is a historic day that I think will be remembered for generations and generations to come. One of the few things that are going to be remembered, because we're an ancient people with a very long memory. We haven't had that many friends. So we remember acts like this across the ages. And I hope we can all take a moment next Monday and appreciate how blessed we are to live during such a time. Now, contrary to belief, I believe that this decision to move the embassy will advance peace. I know the opposite is believed by a lot of people. And maybe if you think the reason why we don't have peace is because of this or that final status issue that hasn't been resolved exactly, and so this will tilt the scales one way or the other, maybe I suppose you could hold that view, but that's not why we don't have peace. We don't have peace because the Palestinians refuse to recognize the legitimacy of a Jewish state in any boundary. That is the reason why we do not have peace. And there is a constant effort by the PA, by the Palestinian Authority, and by Palestinian leadership in general, to deny Israel's legitimacy, to deny any historical connection between the Jewish people and the land of Israel. All the time. You see it at the UN, UNESCO, other agencies. And you see it in particular in Jerusalem, where there's an attempt to deny any connection between the Jewish people and Jerusalem. You saw when Arafat was at Camp David with President Clinton, and he told President Clinton there was never a temple on the Temple Mount. And you see it when the current Palestinian leader, when he's not railing against the Jews and the Holocaust and everything else, when he says that the Jews are trying to Judeify Jerusalem. Have you heard that? That's interesting. It's like the Chinese Sinifying Beijing, the Russians Russifying Moscow. How ridiculous is that? We are Judaizing Jerusalem, where we have a connection for 3,000 years. And the reason why they do it is something that people don't focus on. They usually ignore it. Oh, they're just speaking to their politics. It's a much deeper reason. Because they know that to recognize a historic claim of the Jewish people to Jerusalem or to any place in Israel will make the whole scaffolding of their argument and their case against Israel collapse. Because their case is basically that we, the Jewish people, stole their house. That's their case. And that's what they teach their kids. And that's why no matter what you give them, as long as they hold that view, you'll never be able to make peace. You could offer 99% of a stolen house back. Owner's not going to take it. And he should. Right? And 99%, I'm not talking about the West Bank and Gaza, Judea and Samaria. I'm talking about Israel. All of Israel. They believe we stole their house. Now, of course, you and I know we did steal their house. That this is our homeland. We have a historic connection that goes back 3,000 years. Israel to the Jewish people is not Algeria to the French, and India to the British, and the Congo to the Belgians. This is where our patriarchs prayed. It's where our prophets preached. It's where our kings ruled. And it's where we have a unique connection where you could sum up the entire hopes of our people in 3 words. L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. 4 words in English. Next year in Jerusalem. This is our connection. But they want to deny that connection. Now, if they recognize that that land is also ours by right, even if they say it's 1% yours and it's 99% ours, you're in a negotiation. But if they say you stole their house, you're never going to get anywhere. Which is why the decision of President Trump to recognize Jerusalem as our capital and the decision to move the embassy actually advances peace. Because it punctures this great lie that the Jewish people do not have a connection to our land and that the Jewish people do not have a connection to our capital. And I hope that it will lead the Palestinians over time, it's not going to happen overnight, to understand that the Jewish people are in our homeland by right, not just by might. And once they recognize that we will have taken a critical step forward in achieving a lasting peace. Now, there are many other challenges that Israel has to deal with. There's the challenge of a rising tide of anti-Semitism around the world. You saw that, you see it in the physical attacks in Europe. A Holocaust survivor who was burned in her apartment in France. You saw it in Charlottesville. This is not new. It's been going on for a while. In 2014 and in 2015, attacks on Jews, believe it or not, accounted for over half of hate crimes against religious groups in the United States. That's 2014 and 2015. It's continuing in 2016 and 2017. But this is a real problem, and the manifestation of it on a political level is the BDS movement, which is an anti-Semitic movement. Just the way you spot anti-Semitism is people try to single the Jewish people out for special treatment. And that's how you can spot that the BDS movement is an anti-Semitic movement. And if they were calling to boycott 20 states or 30 states, then I know I'm dealing with people with a principle. But when you're just going to boycott one state in the world, sanction one state, divest from one state, there's only one principle that can explain it. And the principle is anti-Semitism. And that's why it has to be called out, and it has to be challenged, and it has to be fought. We also have the challenge of ensuring that Israel always remains a place where all Jews around the world can feel at home, whether they're traditional or secular, whether they are Orthodox, whether they are conservative, or whether they are Reform. That is an important challenge that Israel has. And we also have a challenge in Israel of finding the right balance between the branches of our government. People forget that Israel is a young country, only 70 years old. A lot of things that other countries have gone through, Israel, a long time ago, Israel's going through now. What's the proper role of the court? What's the proper role of the Knesset? What's the proper role of our executive? And they're not simple answers. And claims that this means that Israel is not a democracy or is losing a democracy are frankly ridiculous. The battle to establish judicial review in the United States was fought against the greatest Democrat, small d in history, Thomas Jefferson. He refused, the author of the Bill of Rights refused to accept the idea that a Supreme Court could knock out legislation in the Congress. Refused to accept it. Said it was anti-democratic. Now, I'm not saying what the right answer is. That's for our Knesset to decide. But those who jumped on the bandwagon and accused Israel of losing its democracy, slow down. It's a natural process that happens in democratic societies, and it's happening in Israel today. And I'm sure you have many questions about those topics, and in a few minutes, I'll sit down and answer as best I can. But because we are celebrating Israel's 70th birthday this month, I don't want to simply talk about the challenges Israel faces. I want to explain why I am so optimistic about Israel's future. I heard that you said Connie was an optimist, that her glass was always overflowing. So when people think about Israel, we focus on the problems. It's hard for Jews to hear good news about Israel. We tend to see the glass as 1/16 empty. But it's full. In fact, it's overflowing. And there are many reasons for optimism. Last year, rankings came out. Most powerful countries in the world. Israel ranked 8th. 8th. And it wasn't from the local Hadassah chapter of Nashville. Not that I have anything against Hadassah. 3 generations of women in my family, all members of Hadassah, and my young Golda, I'm sure, will be a lifelong member of Hadassah as well. But we were 8th. Think about that. We're a 70-year-old country that has fewer than 9 million citizens. And Israel's the 8th most powerful country in the world. It was the permanent 5, the United States, Russia, China, Britain, France. There was Japan and Germany. And then there was Israel, the state of Israel. I think that's pretty impressive. And when you think about the power Israel has, it's really mind-boggling. Israel is stronger militarily than ever. We have the strongest military in the Middle East. We have both offensive weapons like the Joint Strike Fighter, the new F-35 aircraft, and defensive weapons like the Iron Dome system that we developed with the United States, the Arrow, David Sling. And we are stronger, we're getting stronger. And here, I want to thank the previous president, President Obama, for the last few months of his administration signing a new MOU, Memorandum of Understanding for military assistance for Israel for the next decade. That's something we should all be grateful for. Israel is stronger economically than ever. In 1948, Israel had the same GDP as Egypt and Jordan. Today, our GDP per capita is higher than the EU average and Japan. Think about that. We are also a center of innovation in the world. Over 40 of the leading technology companies in the world have R&D facilities in Israel, and for some, it's their only facility outside the United States. And in the 21st century of knowledge, Israel is probably poised like no other country in the world to seize the future. We are becoming a global technological power in many fields. In water technology, in cyber technology. There's something that may not amaze people here, but certainly amazes me. Israel is 1/10 of the world's population. Israel accounted the last 2 years for over 20% of global investment in cyber. That means Israel's punching 200 times above its weight. So in cyber, don't think of Israel as a small country the size of New Jersey. In cyber, Israel's bigger than China. And now you see in autonomous vehicles, Israel leading the world. I think you're going to see it in healthcare. You're going to see it in many, many other areas where Israel's brightest economic days are still to come. Military power, economic power has led to the third thing, which is a story that a lot of people don't know, which is diplomatic power. You remember stories about Israel's growing isolation in the world? Israel has never been less isolated. We are rapidly expanding our ties around the world. 2 small countries in Asia, India and China, you may have heard of them. This year, Indian Prime Minister Modi became the first sitting Indian Prime Minister to visit Israel. Yesterday, Japan's Abe was in Israel. And the Prime Minister has gone to these countries. He's the first Prime Minister in decades to go to Africa. He's been there 3 times in the last few years. The first Prime Minister to go to South America, where he was a few months ago. So we're going to them and they're coming to us. And you know why? Because of those 2 things. Military security power and economic power. They want us to help them to keep their people safe by working with their intelligence agencies, by helping in other ways to secure their countries and their citizens. Israel itself has foiled some 24 major terrorist attacks in the last couple of years. Major terrorist attacks. Saving people throughout the world. Countries around the world want to partner with Israel because of that. And they want access to Israel's technology. Agricultural technology, and water technology, and cyber, and so many other ways. And for many years, as you know, as Israel is becoming now a rising power, that hasn't translated yet to votes in multilateral institutions like the United Nations. People sitting in the United Nations remind us a lot of times of that Japanese soldier that was stranded on the islands, that island in the Philippines. Somebody had forgotten to tell him the war was over decades before. The war against Israel around the world's over. We got enemies like Iran for sure. But beyond that, all these countries are trying to deepen their bilateral ties with Israel. But in their votes in the UN, it hasn't changed it. And to change it, we not only have to continue to be strong, but we needed a tailwind from Washington. And boy, did we get one in Hurricane Haley. How about that? Now you can say to me, well, that's power. Military power, economic power, diplomatic power. What about values? We're a Jewish state. Our values have always been critical to who we are. Well, I cannot tell you how proud I am to be Israel's ambassador, to be able to represent a country like Israel. I am proud of our democracy in Israel, because democracies are tested under fire. That's when it counts. Everyone can talk about principles and theory, but when it counts, when you are under assault, Israel's not a perfect country. We're not. Because we're a sovereign country, we make mistakes. But if you think about the challenges Israel faces, the security threats Israel faces, and how Israel has conducted itself, it's remarkable not just by Middle Eastern standards, it's remarkable by any standard. And I say that also as a proud son of the United States of America, a country that I believe is also a moral country. Not a perfect country, but a moral country that has been a great force for good in the world. And if you don't appreciate that, then go back and read a few history books about other great powers and how they act. Israel is the most beleaguered democracy on earth, and we have upheld our values under the most extreme conditions. I'll give you an example. You remember there was an attack in San Bernardino, California, about 2 years ago? What was interesting is right after that attack there was a poll. And I'm not going to wade into your politics. But in that poll they said how many people want to ban Muslims from entering the country. And the number was high, very high. And it was high on both sides of the aisle. It wasn't just all on one side. 25, 30% in one party and maybe 60% in another party. One attack. We've had 100 San Bernardinos. You remember the situation in this country on September 12, 2001? How people thought that another threat was imminent? And in that environment, people were willing to trade in some civil liberties in order to ensure their security? And over time, as that threat recedes, people naturally want to make sure that they're protecting their civil liberties. That's natural. When you judge Israel, understand something. Israel has been in September 12 for 70 years. 70 years. And that's why I don't apologize for Israel's democracy. I celebrate Israel's democracy. Now, obviously, I'm proud also of Israel's contribution to the world. Its technology, it's in your computers, in your cell phones, your cars. Technology that has helped quenching the world's thirst and help feeding poor in countries across the world. I'm proud of our science and medicine that's pushing the envelope and coming up with cures for Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis. I'm proud of my country's compassion that treats wounded Syrians on our border. And it's the first for when disaster strikes around the world, from Haiti to Nepal. And ladies and gentlemen, not only am I optimistic about Israel and proud of Israel, above all, and this is something I heard when you mentioned Connie, I'm grateful for Israel. As Israel celebrates 70 years, we should all be grateful that we are blessed to live at a time when there is a sovereign Jewish state. Sovereignty means many things. It's a big word. But above all, to me, it means three things. The gifts that Israel has given the Jewish people. The first thing, it gives us a voice. It used to be we had to plead with others to make our case. Well, you remember, of course, during the Holocaust, how we had to go to a Polish diplomat who would spend a few minutes with President Roosevelt to make the case for the Jews of Europe. Well, today, we plead our own case. And the Prime Minister does it when he comes to Congress or when he goes to the United Nations. And ambassadors and consul generals get to do it on CNN or BBC. The most amazing thing about being an ambassador of Israel is that there are ambassadors of Israel. That the Jewish people have a voice. The second thing that Israel has given the Jewish people is a refuge. The great question that Jewish communities for centuries had grappled with across the world, Europe, United States, North Africa, Asia, you name it, was where are we going to go? When the problems start, where are we going to go? And there's a lot of questions people are asking about this rising tide of anti-Semitism I spoke about in Europe and elsewhere. But one question no one's asking is where are those Jews going to go? And the reason why they're not asking that question is because Israel is an answer. It may not be the answer, and those governments should do everything to protect their Jewish citizens, but it is an answer. And we have seen that it's been an answer from persecuted Jews, first fleeing the killing fields of Europe, leaving North Africa and the Middle East after Israel's establishment when they were thrown out. When we airlifted Ethiopian Jews to safety, and when the Iron Curtain fell and over 1 million Jews from the former Soviet Union came to Israel. A voice and a refuge. And the most important thing, gift, blessing, that Israel has given the Jewish people is a shield. It has given us the ability to defend ourselves. For centuries, Jews begged the local policeman or the magistrate to protect us from pogroms and from massacres. We begged kings and presidents to come to our aid, to save our communities, to bomb the tracks. Today, the Jewish people beg no more. Today, we, the Jewish people, defend ourselves. So the glass is not 1/16 empty, it's overflowing. And we should all remember at this 70th year how fortunate we are that our grandparents and their grandparents and their grandparents and their grandparents would have given anything to trade their problems with ours. 100 generations of Jews dreamed of having the privilege that 3 generations, all in this room, have had. To live at a time when there would be a sovereign Jewish state. And this year, on our 70th birthday, we should be especially grateful. Because we are like that generation of the Maccabees, who had the privilege of witnessing the restoration of our sovereignty and the rebuilding of Jerusalem. And with that privilege comes a great responsibility, which is to secure that dream for future generations. And that is not a responsibility of prime ministers or ambassadors alone. You all have a responsibility to do that as well. And by strengthening this Jewish community right here in Boston, by strengthening this shul right here, you become true partners with the one and only Jewish state to secure the Jewish future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, Ambassador Dermer. We're so thankful to have you here. And it's my pleasure now to offer some questions that came within the community ahead of the talk that are related to what you had to say about the challenges facing Israel. And I'd like to start with a question about the Iranians and not just the possibility of them acquiring nuclear weapons, but as you mentioned, their increased destabilizing role throughout the region. And how has that impacted Israel's relations with some of the surrounding Arab states, with some of the surrounding Sunni states in the region? How have things changed since the new rise of Iran?
So there's no question that the silver lining in the very dark Iranian cloud over the Middle East is that Israel's Arab neighbors, some of whom we have no formal diplomatic relations with, understand that we are not their enemy. That we are actually partners for confronting their enemies. And what has happened in recent years is 3 things sort of came together at the same time. The first was the empowerment of Iran, which really frightens them, the Arab states, because they have designs on them too. I always say it's for the Iranians, it's Riyadh is breakfast, Jerusalem is lunch, and New York is dinner. They're very frightened. So you had the rise of Iran. The second thing is you had the rise of ISIS. And ISIS, if you don't know, Iran is a Shia fanatic regime. You should also know that Israel doesn't have a problem at all with the people of Iran. Historically, we had good relations with the people of Iran, and I believe that we will have good relations with them once again. Jews have been knocked around in so many different countries and civilizations that we know a tolerant civilization when we see one. And historically speaking, there's been no place like the United States, but Persia may be second, a distant second, but second, because it was an open, pluralistic, tolerant society. And of course, we have the example of Haman, but we also have Cyrus, which I spoke about. about. And I believe that we can have a wonderful friendship with the Iranian people. So the problem was the Shia fanatic regime of the Ayatollahs in Tehran. But there's another fanaticism, which is Sunni fanaticism. And 1.0 was Al-Qaeda, 2.0 was ISIS, and there'll be a 3.0 or 4.0. And so these Arab governments, they're frightened of both fanaticisms. And the third thing that put it together, frankly, was the perception of a U.S. withdrawal from the region. Because they were looking around, and I'll try to simplify it, they see the Iranian tiger getting more dangerous, an ISIS leopard getting more dangerous, and the 800-pound gorilla, American gorilla, just left the building. And they looked around in the corner and they saw a 250-pound gorilla wearing the kippah. And they said, wait, maybe they'll help us confront our enemies. And I think that bodes very well for peace. It may not have sounded that way, but I'm actually more optimistic about the prospects for peace than I have been in a very, very long time. Peace is a big word. Let's start with reconciliation. A historic reconciliation between Israel and our Arab neighbors. And it's precisely because this dynamic that's happening that was brought to the surface by the empowerment of Iran, by ISIS and what's coming next, and also by the perception of U.S. disengagement from the region. The difficult part of translating this is that these Arab governments have poisoned their people for 70 years against Israel. And even though they're not democracies, it's not simple for them to just turn on a dime. And surfacing this new relationship, which is going on underneath the surface, is one of the great challenges of our diplomacy. We got to get it right. I have actually great admiration for the Prime Minister, who has not revealed, he's very good at keeping secrets if you didn't know last Monday. He has not revealed all the contacts that Israel has with the Arab world, because that would actually destroy this effort. And what makes an iceberg strong is not what you see on top of the surface, it's what's underneath. And I can assure you, what's underneath the surface is very, very dramatic. And we have to find a way to surface it. I think the administration I know the administration understands that, and that's part of their effort, and that's why I think it's taking a lot of time. But we have to get it right, and not just go after the headline in the newspaper, which would make Israel more popular in certain quarters for a day, but actually see if we can get a real breakthrough that will help advance peace and reconciliation in the region. I think that's more possible today than it has been since I've been following things for the last 25 years. So we're interested in it, we're developing it, we're cultivating it, and the trick is how to surface it in a smart and lasting way. And we're focused on it.
Great. Well, I'd love to pick up on that idea of peace and reconciliation that you were talking about. I certainly appreciate your analysis that the move of the embassy to Jerusalem will further the prospects of peace, and hope that turns out to be correct. And regardless of the truth of that, what obligations does the Israeli government have towards making peace with the Palestinians, towards creating reconciliation in the broader region?
Well, Israeli governments for a long time have made clear, both in word and deed, their commitment to advancing a lasting peace. I mean, Israelis have tried a lot of things. They've made sweeping peace offers. You had at least 2 sweeping offers. Ehud Barak's government in 2000, and you had Ehud Olmert in 2008. The Prime Minister was engaged in a process with Kerry where we also showed our willingness to enter into talks, and the Palestinians wouldn't actually advance that. So we always have to be willing to explore any possibility of peace. But I'll tell you all something. If you want to understand what the prospects for peace are between Israelis and Palestinians, don't focus on the statement of this or that president, this or that secretary of state, or this or that envoy, as talented and articulate as they may be. Turn on Palestinian television sets and see what they are teaching their children. If they teach them to respect Israel, if they're moving them towards some reconciliation with Israel, you'll know that the diplomats will succeed. If they're poisoning the minds of the next generation, then they're going to fail. And if those governments give money to people who kill Jews, no peace effort is going to succeed. This requires a change, a dramatic change within Palestinian society to get them to embrace the path for peace. They have not done it. And I think in order to effect that change, You need to have pressures from the outside telling them that these types of things are unacceptable. It was interesting. You saw Abu Mazen make his comments last week. Holocaust denial, I mean, terrible things that he said. I don't even have to repeat it here. What was interesting is Abu Mazen lost the New York Times. Wow. That may be a sign of the coming of the Messiah. They actually said this is unacceptable. And former Secretary of State Kerry came out and said this is unacceptable. And a lot of people around the world who always gave the Palestinians the benefit of the doubt started saying this is unacceptable. He didn't apologize on day 1 or day 2 or day 3, but about 4 or 5 days later, when all of this pressure came, he issued an apology. Now, do I think it's genuine? No. But I think you have to force Palestinian leaders to act and speak in a certain way to be considered legitimate interlocutors for a peace process. And not just say, well, it's all about, quote unquote, the occupation, it's all about their grievances, and we can just dismiss anything they have to say. That's what happened for 25 years, and that's why we're no closer today than we did at the beginning. 25 years is a generation since Oslo. Had we focused on what those children were watching on their television sets, today we'd be much closer to peace. Who knows, maybe we've already got to peace if we had a generation that was raised in a different way. And I think that's what our focus should be, and hopefully the Arab states that are changed, Arab governments that have changed their views of Israel can help move the region in a different direction. That's our hope, and we'll continue to pursue it the best we can.
One other topic that you mentioned towards the end of your talk was the idea of religious acceptance in Israel. Certainly that's something that's of concern to a lot of American Jews, and there's a concern that there's a growing rift in some areas between Israeli Jewry and American Jewry, whether it's the status of worship at the Kotel, at the Western Wall, or we saw a great controversy around the recent comments by Natalie Portman. But what obligations do these two societies, do these two great Jewish bodies have towards each other, and to make sure that we're reconciling and unifying with each other as well?
Well, I think there is an obligation there. I mean, Jews who live outside of Israel have a sort of a unique status that non-Jews would not have, only because they're potential citizens for our state. The most important law in Israel is the law of return. The idea that any Jew anywhere can tomorrow go and come to Israel is the raison d'etre of Israel. For Israel to have the power, like I said, to have a voice, a refuge, and a shield. And that refuge makes this relationship between Israel and diaspora Jewry, no matter where it is, I think unique. Now, diaspora Jews don't have a vote, but they have a voice. And their voice is heard in a different way than the voices of others, not beyond their numbers. And it's important to express it. It's important to say exactly how you feel about it. It's also important, I will tell you as somebody who's in these decision-making forums, the more people are supportive of Israel at critical times, and the more they hear that support, the more their criticism is taken seriously, very seriously. When you are a lifelong advocate of Israel, and we hear time and again your support on critical matters for the fate of the country, and that you're there in the trenches, when you criticize Israel, people pay attention to it. If you're somebody or an organization that every 99 out of 100 press releases is critical, no one pays attention to it. So that's important to understand. Also, understand that we're undergoing a shift in the relationship between the U.S., diaspora Jewry, in particular the U.S. and also Israel, because when Israel was established in 1948, 600,000 Jews lived in Israel. It was 5% of the world's Jewry. It was 2% of world's Jewry before the Holocaust lived in Israel. 600,000 out of about 12 or 13 million, about 5%. And the United States was by far the biggest Jewish community in the world. Largely because Europe's Jewish community was largely wiped out. The relationship of 600,000 Jews in Israel, maybe 6 million Jews in the United States at that time, were 1/10 of the population. Now, Israel, for the first time in nearly 19th century, since the days of Bar Kokhba, Israel is the largest Jewish community in the world. Have about 43% of the world's Jews live in Israel, another 35 or 36% live in the United States, and the other 20% are spread in France, in England, South America, the former Soviet Union that still has many Jews. That's going to create a natural shift. And I think you're in the process of it. It's hard for people to see it that way because we're right in the middle of it. So that changes. The problem that we have in terms of religious pluralism in Israel, understand it's not a new problem. It's been there from the beginning of the state. It just has come to the surface more dramatically in recent years. The issue of the Kotel is one that I think is particularly resonant because that's a place where every Jew feels a unique connection. And there is an effort to find a solution that will ensure that that will be a place that will unite all the Jews of the world and not divide it. Now, it's important also to understand, wherever you are on this particular solution and what you think the solution should be, the Kotel is not just another synagogue in Israel. Meaning, if Israel's government were instructing people to go into a reform or conservative synagogue in Israel and stop them from praying, that would be like a theocracy. That's not what you have at the Kotel. The Kotel is a national site. It is a unique place. Jews do not pray on the Temple Mount. I can say I disagree with that or agree with it, but I'm not going to say because of that there's no religious freedom in Israel. I'm not going to say that. There's a lot of sensitivity around that one particular site. And the same thing with Kotel. So people have to understand the sensitivities of that site. And we tried to come up with a solution regarding the Kotel that would allow for people who wanted to join a pluralistic minyan to find appropriate expression. The Supreme Court said that Israel has to find an appropriate prayer space. Now, there is a prayer space for non-Orthodox prayer at the Kotel. I was there a couple months ago. I think they had 10 or 12 bar mitzvahs that day and bat mitzvahs in the same day. People don't know that. So there was a space, but it wasn't treated in the same way that the other space. You didn't have the prayer books the way you needed it. You didn't have the entrance the way you needed it. You didn't have the hours when it. So there were a lot of issues. So what the Prime Minister tried to do is advance a solution that would create this appropriate prayer space. And finding the solution in the dialogue that was led by Natan Sharansky, we also addressed a couple of other issues that are more ideologically, that pack an ideological punch, which was giving a role for non-Orthodox Jews on the management of that site, and also on having a common interest. I know this, I may be in the weeds in discussing it, but the point is we thought we had an agreement, and then all of a sudden, parties in the coalition decided to back away from the agreement. Now, it's easy to say, well, just stand up and go to an election on that issue. You could do that. You'd be in an election every week in Israel if you do that. And then what happens after the election? We're a democracy in Israel. Ultra-Orthodox parties are part of Israeli society, and they're going to continue to be part of Israeli society, and they're a growing part of Israeli society. And what I found in working on these issues for the last 20 years, that if you quietly work to advance the ball down the field, don't go for the Hail Mary. You go for the Patriots are actually quite good at this. Is that kind of 40-yard pass. So maybe I should speak to Bob Kraft about how to advance religious pluralism in Israel, because it's those short little things that ultimately get you where you need to go. And a lot of times when you go for something dramatic, everyone applauds, and then 2 years later, all of a sudden there's a huge shift to the other side. And I don't think that's good for Israel. I don't think it's good for the Jewish people. I don't think it's good for our relationship. So what we're doing now, just a final word, which is a very short answer to a long question. But what we're doing now is we're going to build that space. And we're going to practically advance the exact plan that we agreed on before. And on terms of the ideologically combustible issues, we're going to continue to try to discuss that and move the possible. But if you go in a year from now to that prayer space, I think you're going to find a prayer space that's going to make you proud, and it's going to make Israel and the Kotel, I should say, a place where every Jew around the world can feel at home.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you again as we ask Jeremy to come up and offer some closing remarks. Thank you again for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Dermer, for joining us and for your powerful remarks. I suspect that if Mr. Kraft were here, he would point out that it's about special teams. And we in the American Jewish community consider ourselves a special team in getting Israel to number 8 on that list. And we want to thank the generous donors and sponsoring organizations and synagogues who helped to make this evening possible, and to Rabbi Berman and Temple Reim for help for hosting us. Also, thank you to Herbie Birbaum and the Birbaum family for entrusting Connie's legacy through this meaningful lecture with JCRC. Connie loved Israel and Klal Yisrael, and so do we in the Boston Jewish community. And we express our love and support for Israel and Klal Yisrael through our advocacy for the strengthening of the Mass-Israel Economic Partnership. We express that love by engaging and taking Christian clergy and elected officials to Massachusetts every single year, at least twice a year, to help them discover firsthand the Israel that we love and know and whose future we believe in. We express that love and support through our efforts to rally the community in combating BDS, including most recently in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where so many of you made an important contribution. And we express that love for Klal Yisrael and the people of Israel by bringing together young people and non-Jewish influentials and others in Boston in belief for hope for the future of Israel through the Boston Partners for Peace. And in all these ways and in all the work of JCRC and our Jewish community, we hope that Connie's memory will be for a blessing. I want to thank everyone for being here. There will be a short musical program to wrap up our night. And I'm going to ask you, because of security reasons, at the end of the musical program, to please remain in your seats so that the ambassador can leave the room promptly. Thank you very much. And after the end of the program, after the ambassador has left the room, we invite you to join us for a reception outside. Let's bring that.